that's nice. How do I do it? Just
Just go to the next event.
which one?
Just the arrow keys,
okay.
or you can click whatever you want to do.
Oh, let me see if let me do an arrow key. Ooh. Oh, by the way, this one is just gratuitous. You can try it with this little call. So, first of all, I think my title talks about the fur country, and it's true. However, it comes up like really at the end, because when I started writing it, that's not what was coming up. So I got distracted by other meteorological things that fascinated me. And the second thing is like the other thing that came out. This is just like because what I am. It's an academic paper. It's like so academic, like Kabuki theater of academia. So it's got Macedonic quotes and critics and acting things out. So there is vintage academia. So I hope you won't mind. So you will travel in a land of marvels. That's what Phileas Fogg tells Passepartout in chapter 11 of Around the World in 80 Days. And indeed, Fogg and Passepartout will cross seas, the skies, land masses, international datelines, and as well as storms and natural disasters and inclement weather. Yet as Liedenbrock instructs Axel in Voyage to the Center of the Earth, while they're exploring these underground oceans, they discover miles beneath the Earth's surface, nature and marvelous are intertwined in Verne's poetic universe. So at that time, Axel says, it's marvelous, c'est merveilleux. And Liedenbrock calms him down and says, no, it's natural. And so I like this tension between the natural and the marvelous, and that's what I'm going to be working on. So while Verne had indeed written poetry, which we know, like this is when he was really young, I find like when he describes natural phenomena, that's totally poetic. It's these electrical storms, the aurora borealis, moonbeams, fires, sunsets, sunrises. To me, that's one of the things that really interests me the most, in addition to all the narratives and plots and adventures. Yeah, when I was reading The Land of Furs, this captivated me, and then it made me go back to other texts where weather, but also meteorology, is highlighted in such a way as to advance something else, like a spiritual and metaphysical aspect of the novel. So in The Green Ray, so the Green Ray was also translated as the Green Flash, right? But in French it's le rayon vert. The rare and unusual green flash that it can appear just as the sun sets has spiritual powers that can change people's lives in profound and meaningful ways. So to quote from that text, anyone who is fortunate enough to witness the green flash will be granted the ability to be never deceived in matters of the heart, as they will be able to read into their own hearts and the hearts of others. I always found that really, really moving, that idea, and so I'm not alone probably in like chasing the green ray. But I know once there was a presentation here where there was a sailor and he chased the green ray on the oceans and he took a picture of it. I thought, wow, that's really cool. And I think I see the green ray, like because I'm myopic, but I don't think it is that. In other instances, such as the field of ice, Verne seems fascinated by a transformation of the ice, the sea, and the sky all coming together. So at one point, the ocean landscape and horizon turn into this black, vaporous fog called the blink of freed water, which already is like a beautiful concept. Like it's like liberty and freedom through the water. Yet, it can also be seen as Hatteras' vision of freedom, right? His quest for free motion, to be freed of this frozen ice. When Hatteras sees the signs that the fields are melting, oh, I better follow. Okay. So when he sees that the fields are melting, he's filled with this ecstasy, this sense of ecstasy, and he says, Hatteras could not contain himself as he watched the fields of ice show their first signs of thawing. A liberated sea was for him liberty itself. At times the snow is scarlet red. One can imagine each crew member's surprise, exclamations, and even an initial feeling of terror at seeing this crimson curtain. We were talking about alliterations today, and this translator really nailed the alliteration of the sea. Or described as a field of blood. At other times, the ice crystals that surround them are void of color at all. Right? They're, quote, curious, transparent, colorless, and endowed with a particular type of refraction found in space of Iceland. Right? Going back to your land. And finally, the spectacle of nature can burst into the symphony of colors during a period of the midnight sun. So he writes, on the 29th of May, for the first time, the sun did not set. Its disk had grazed the edge of the horizon, barely scratching it before rising once again. The next day, the radiant star seemed to be surrounded by a magnificent halo, a luminous circle shining with all the colors of the prism. So I think I have a shot of the halo. Yeah, that's one. That's two. So if you want to read more about this halo in a scientific way, Marie-Hélène Huet, in this book on the Eaton collection, she writes really beautifully about this halo, but she does it in a completely scientific way and based on the actual navigators before Hatteras who wrote about that too. So it's a very cool article. In each case, Verne brings attention to the true wonders of the landscape, similar to the manner in which Dr. Klobony, in the same book about Hatteras, is enthralled by cosmic manifestations he observes by himself. So I quote, indeed, the doctor always admired these cosmic phenomena his companions were utterly oblivious to. He had noticed, in fact, that their apparitions were always preceded by agitations from his compass needle, and he was preparing to write about the subject among the observations he included in the weather book. So if Klobony is bent on contributing to this famous weather book that Verne informs us dates from the time of Admiral Fitzroy, so it's this log, like this amazing log in which all meteorological facts are recorded. Verne does the same, but through his prism, this prism of art, fiction, poetic imagination, that add layers to the spaces his readers discover, along with his heroes. Right? So it's like different layers of space. So for Simon Verne, who we were talking about earlier, in this book, Jules Verne and the Novel of Initiation, Verne constructs his novels as series of initiations, she tells us, right? Similar to Masonic rituals, but also Masonic symbolism of darkness, blindness, light. His characters confront their worst fears and conquer them by descending into an abyss or climbing the highest peak, ascending the skies and even outer space, penetrating the deepest parts of the earth. So for Verne's characteristics, or their characters, plunge into the most absolute of darknesses, but they emerge from this in the highest of lights. So geographies, by extension, fierce weather patterns, cataclysms, mini-apocalypses, posit the challenges the heroes must triumph over. In the polar novels in particular, the extremities of the Earth create a natural yet superhuman electrical energy that can inspire or destroy in a series of bursts and motions. This is why the metaphor of the Sphinx, right here, in the Sphinx of the ice fields, highlights these points of the world and how they make up this kind of riddle the initiated must solve. The magnetic poles are in fact shaped like this giant magnet in the form of a sphinx who reigns over the polar sphere like the ones in the Egyptian desert. And that's why Jarling, who is obsessed with attaining the pole for all the knowledge he thinks he can find there, dreams of, what I quote, a type of sphinx that could dominate the southern ice cap. I go towards it, he says in this kind of trance. I question it. It yields all the secrets of these mysterious regions to me. As Verne describes it, the monster that the pole represents is this giant magnet, but the cause of the magnetic phenomena that has been unexplained up until now and that are always linked to all the imagined universes of electric phenomena and to the secret worlds itself. Verne attempts to explain the aurora borealis, the confusion of compasses in the polar region, and especially the opposition between Arctic and Antarctic regions in terms of positive and negative electrical charges. As Verne writes in The Sphinx, this mass had to be placed in the magnetic axis like a kind of gigantic lodestone, whence the imponderable fluid was disengaged and whose currents made it an inexhaustible accumulator erected at the confines of the world. If the Sphinx serves as a direct sequel to Edgar Allan Poe's 1838, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, Verne uses this magnetic mountain to provide a rational, scientific, Vernean explanation for the supernatural phenomena Poe described at the end of the story. Verne's findings, or scientific, oops, wrong page. So Verne's meddling of scientific explanations to provide anchors to tempestuous situations that nature presents to his adventurers and poetic beauty to show how astonishingly evocative these natural phenomena are, in fact resemble, to me, because I'm plowing into that now, Lucretius's theories of poetry and nature in the Aurorum Natura, which really is a combination of Roman poetry and his concepts of physical space. For Lucretius, explanations of natural cataclysms would help calm readers who might otherwise exclusively consider them as part of the wrath of the gods. As Nathaniel Durant explains it, Lucretius seeks to offer his readers insight into the natural causes and processes behind both destructive and benign natural phenomena. Explanations that should allow his audience to dispel any remaining fear of the gods. It's important to note that Lucretius is not advocating that his readers remain unafraid when confronted with these natural disasters or natural forces like earthquakes and hurricanes, but rather that they understand the sources of these events and no longer fear their origin or what awaits them after death. So there are really nice articles on that, on how to read Lucretius to deal with death anxiety. So if anyone feels about that, like, go to Lucretius. So Lucretius actually, he talks about this term of ataraxia, which is kind of very Zen. It comes from Epicurus, which is like this mental and emotional tranquility and clear conscious thought. So as Lucretius writes, he writes, this terror then, this darkness of the mind, must needs be scattered not by rays and the gleaming shaft of the day, but by the outer view and the inner law of nature. So as Amy Olderling has written also about Lucretius, she writes of his sense of wonder, this marvel, he uses the word marvelous, as a remedy for death, anxiety, not death. Marveling at nature goes hand in hand with understanding it. Bringing attention to the novelty of unique natural events wakes us up from the monotony of daily lives, which tend to take nature for granted. Verne's beautiful descriptions of meteorological splendors can be seen in conjunction with Lucretius, who writes, "There is no thing so easily understood except that which at first seems difficult to believe, and nothing is so great and wonderful that bit by bit all men will cease to wonder at it. First take a clear, pure color of the heaven and all that it contains, the wandering stars, the moon, the brightness of the sun with its dazzling light. If all these things were suddenly and unexpectedly cast before our eyes for the very first time, what could be more wondrous than this? What would men have less dared to believe existed before they saw it? Nothing, as I think, so wonderful would have been that sight, and yet no one thinks it's worthwhile to look up at the lucid temples of the heavens, since they're wearied by the satiety of seeing it." So in Lucretius' world, as Charles Sequel writes, is a place of marvels, but it's up to the poet to lead us to that, to wake us up from our like monotony. That's why Verne describes natural events in 20,000 Leagues, which we talked about today, as beneficial, inspiring, exciting. When Aronnax begins to write his journal aboard the Nautilus and sees Nemo for the first time, it is in conjunction with a particularly poetic passage describing bursts of light and dissipating fog. The sea becomes seemingly ataraxic in preparation of a natural revelation. So it's interesting, too, that the word apocalypse really actually means a revelation in ancient texts. As I said, so I'm quoting like various cocktails of translations. As I sat on the protrusion, no, that's actually mine. Okay, forget it. As I sat on the protrusion produced by the shell of the canoe, I breathed in all the delights of the saline emanations, Aronnax writes. But little by little, the mist dissipated under the action of the sun's rays. The radiant star overflowed the eastern horizon. The sea caught fire beneath its gaze like a trail of powder. The clouds, scattered in the heights, took on bright, wonderfully nuanced tones, and numerous mare's tails announced wind for the entire day. So Butcher notes about mare's tails. He mentions that it's actually langue de chat in French, and they allude to these beautiful kind of wispy cirrus clouds that add like this ethereal dimension. And there was one translation, actually, just for the translation nerds out there, that literally translated langue de chat as like cat tongues, which makes no sense. It actually means mare. So, the translation moment today brought to you by me. So as he's talking about the Nautilus too, and he says, but what could the wind do to this Nautilus that storms could no longer frighten? So the Nautilus is seen as like this ataraxic phenomenon. So similarly, when Aronnax and Nemo they're visibly moved by the underwater ruins of Atlantis, Verne describes it like a kaleidoscopic cocktail of light and lava that bring them both clarity and contemplative calm. And I quote them, "We remained in this spot for the whole hour, gazing at the vast plain beneath the glow of the lava, which at times took on a surprising intensity. Internal bubbling sent rapid shivers running across the mountain's crust. Deep sounds clearly transmitted by this liquid." Oops. Oh, I forgot. Where am I here? What is this? Oh, Nemo. Okay. Okay, we'll stop there. Echoed in majestic amplitude. So once again, light in the form of moonbeams in this passage provide an uncanny, meditative, yet indescribable effect on the contemplators. At that moment, so I'm quoting Aronnax again, at that moment the moon appeared for an instant through the massive waters and threw a few pale rays on the sunken continent. It was but a gleam, but what an indescribable effect. The captain rose, cast one last look on the immense plain, and then signaled me to follow him. So this passage, I'm going backwards a little bit, but the passage is punctuated by Aronnax's disbelief and this almost aphasic inability to describe it. So it's peppered like with question marks and questions. And it's similar in a certain passage in Lucretius where he does the same thing. Question, question, question. And this is what happens to Aronnax. And in a way, Lucretius tries to reassure us, and then Nemo reassures Aronnax. So Aronnax says, "What a spectacle! How to render it? How to paint the appearance of these woods and rocks in this liquid medium? Their undersides dark and fierce, their tops colored with red tones beneath that light, which the reverberating power of the waters doubled." At another moment, Aronnax's series of questions shows this kind of trajectory of doubt at the unexplained Lucretius is so focused on. And he writes, "But the rosy light which guided us increased and lit up the horizon. The presence of this fire underwater puzzled me in the highest degree. Was I going towards a natural phenomena, as yet unknown by the savant of the earth? Or even, for this thought crossed my brain, Had the hand of man with this configuration? Had he fanned this flame? Was I to meet these depths? Was I going to see companions and friends of Captain Nemo who he was going to visit and who, liked him, led this strange existence? All these foolish and unreasonable ideas pursued me. And this condition of mind, overexcited by the succession of wonders continually passing before my eyes, I should not have been surprised to meet at that bottom of the sea a team of submarine towns which Captain Nemo dreamed of. But it also leads to this ataraxic feeling under Nemo's guidance. And he writes, our road, so this is again part of the initiation kind of thing. It's dark, and then it's lighter. So our road grew lighter and lighter. The white glimmer came in rays from the summit of a mountain about 800 feet high. But what I saw was simply a reflection developed by the clearness of the waters. The source of this inexplicable light was a fire on the opposite side of the mountain. In the midst of this stony maze, furrowing the bottom of the Atlantic, Captain Nemo advanced without hesitation. He knew this dreary road. Doubtless he had often traveled over it and could not lose himself. I followed him with unshaken confidence. He seemed to me like the genie of the sea. As he walked before me, I could not help admiring his stature, which was outlined in black on the luminous horizon. And again, as Verne examines, Nemo is in fact initiating Aronnax, in this case, through the undersea darkness and bewilderment towards the light and calming effect of knowledge. The anxiety created by the unknown dissipates in the face of the known. And so here are like other positions we see in the novel of Nemo in this position of stalwart up on a mountain. And I'll mention in a minute, but it reminds me of Caspar David Friedrich, and the notion of the sublime. So if Nemo at Aronnax visits to the Atlantis can resemble this sort of Grecian Nikia, so Victor Hugo talks about this a lot, going down, a descent into the underworld, similar to Odysseus' trip to the edge of Hades to summon Tiresias, the blind prophet. When they reach the South Pole, Nemo ascends a mountain in a manner that is more applicable to the 19th century romantic notion of the sublime, portrayed by Caspar David Friedrich. And that's why I mentioned those other drawings, illustrations, because they're all very much like that. On the top of a peak, climbing a peak. So Philippe Mustiat, another critic, he talks about this very notion of the sublime. And he says, yeah, all these shipwrecks, the hurricanes, the things spiraling out of control are actually reflections of this notion of sublime that prevails over fear. As such, when Nemo climbs this amazing scene in 20,000 Leagues, when he's climbing the mountain in the South Pole, despite the sun's reflection, he's completing this Nikia. So in Nikia, you go down, but then the beauty is you go up. And when you go up, you're ascending. And it becomes another term, a Grecian term, an apotheosis. So when you reach the top, it reaches the summum of your feelings, and you can be in this kind of divine state. And that's what I think Verne is talking about with Nemo. And so I'm going to just quote this passage we're opening up. Again, it's part of this epic hero we were talking about before, right? The myth, the man with 1,000 faces. At 9 o'clock, we reached the shore. The sky was clearing. The clouds were fleeing to the south. The mist was lifting from the cold surface of the water. Captain Nemo headed towards the peak, but he had no doubt intended to use as an observatory. It was difficult climb for over-sharp lava and dark stones amidst an atmosphere often saturated with the sulfurous fumes of fumaroles. Hey, another alliteration, yay. The captain, for a man unaccustomed to the treading on a solid ground, climbed to the steepest slopes with a suppleness, and agility they could hardly match, and that a chamois hunter might have envied. Suddenly, they are immersed in a spiral of light and color, chemicals and air, fire, and an azure in a type of atmospheric epiphany that reflects his epiphany. It took us, with the epiphany being for him that he's in the South Pole with all these calculations. It took us 2 hours to reach the summit of the peak, half porphyry, half basalt. From there, our eyes looked into a vast sea that towards the north clearly traced its terminal line against the backdrop of the sky. At our feet were fields of dazzling whiteness. Above our heads, a pale, cloudless blue. To the north, the sun's disk appeared like a ball of fire, already notched by the sharp edge of the horizon. From the heart of the waters, hundreds of liquid spouts rose in magnificent sprays. In the distance lay the Nautilus, like an immense cetacean, chaotic pile of rocks and ice whose limit would not be seen. So in these passages, the atmosphere and the light go hand in hand with the notion of conquest of space and time that Nemo focuses on. Once he realizes through a multitude of calculations and comparative mathematical operations that he's in fact on the exact spot that he needs and craves, he plants his golden flag, the N, right? Like Napoleonic end. Oh, okay, well, wherever he is. There he is. The Napoleonic N. And as his ascension is once complete, right? And again, the N is like for Nemo, not Napoleon. And Nemo, as we know in Odysseus, is like it's like a way of disguising yourself, a way of disappearing. So he's appearing with the flag, but he's actually disappearing in this sort of humble way. So he writes down, at 1:15 the sun, seen by over fraction only, appeared like a golden disk and scattered its last rays upon the abandoned continent, upon these seas that man has never yet burrowed. Once again, the exuberance of the natural phenomena that Nemo connects with at the top of the mountain leads to a sensation like actually of peace, right? Ataraxia that allows him to say farewell to the sun one last time and return to an absence of weather, an absence of aerial weather. And as the famous scene, this one, farewell sun, disappear, radiant star, set beneath this free sea, and let a 6-month night spread its shadows over my new domain. And so finally, the title, here's more Caspar Friedrich. I feel a lot of his descriptions are like that. So finally we get to the Land of Furs, which I'm only going to briefly talk about, but sort of as a finale. Fireworks. So if light and the absence of light punctuate the atmospheric conditions Nemo confronts once he's out of his protective submarine, the members of the ill-fated expedition of Cape Bathurst in the fur country on the Arctic oceans have what they thought was terra firma suddenly become a wayward and detached iceberg drifting into melting warmer seas. The astronomer Black, who accompanies them, notices that an eclipse that was supposed to occur only partially happens, followed by an earthquake which dooms them all to potential annihilation. Seemingly, in fact, however, the ideal conditions for Lucretian intervention, if you want. As Jasper Hobson, the Courageous Expedition, later notes, the expedition's situation follows Grecian cosmology. What did you call it? Scandinavian cosmology.
He uses both cosmogony.
Cosmogony. Okay, thank you.
He uses both.
He uses it here. Of the 4 elements of this is Val about this. It says of the 4 elements of ancient cosmogony, only one here, air, is useful, necessary, and indispensable to us. But the other 3, earth, fire, and water, should not even exist for us. They are contrary to the very nature of the polar regions. But unwittingly, Hobson touches on what Durant views as the essence of Lucretian thought on the weather, the wind. As he asserts, Lucretius emphasizes wind and air as the primary driving forces between many natural processes in order to set up a stark contrast with the old terrors featuring angry and vengeful deities. So for Lucretius, the wind is invisible, like atoms, but involved in all these dramatic weather events. Unseen bodies of wind that sweep the sea, land, and clouds and tear and harry them with sudden hurricane. Yet with his theories of ataraxia, when mortals confront these particles, they can achieve an inner and outer peace of mind. For the wind, which he calls aura, is also linked to the soul, which is wind-based and which he calls anima. And in this day, when the members of the expedition overcome the obstacles of the wind and the catastrophe it sparks, their souls are enhanced. And they come out of the experience more whole than when they began. That's why when they witness what will be one of the most destructive cataclysms, a fiery volcanic eruption, which will cause a destructive earthquake, which will rip apart what they thought was the landmass supporting them, they actually marvel at what they're observing, unconsciously understanding the majesty and the transformative nature of the event. It's even more beautiful than the aurora borealis, one of the members explains. And Verne uses here the term sublime to describe how indescribable the event is, just as Aronnax could not find the right words to process his emotions. Because they're bundled up with their thick furs, they can't communicate what they're experiencing either. So, I quote, they could have shared the impressions of this sublime spectacle aroused in them, but being hooded in this manner, they were allowed neither to speak nor to hear. They had to be content to see. But what an imposing scene for their eyes, what a memory for their minds. Between the deep darkness of the sky and the whiteness of this immense carpet of snow, the blossoming of the volcanic flames produced lighting effects that neither pen nor brush could have captured. This intense reverberation extended beyond the zenith, gradually engulfing the stars. The white ground took on golden hues. The hummocks of the ice fields, the enormous icebergs, reflected the various glows like so many mirrors burning. These light beams broke or refracted at all these angles, and this differently inclined planes reflected them with a brighter brilliance and a new tint. A truly magical clash of rays. It was as if this was immense ice set off a fairy spectacle, erected expressively for this festival of light. It's a really incredible passage, right? It's like this symphony, this euphoria of a disaster. But he talks about spectacle and watching. And so while these descriptions of weather and meteorology might seem secondary to the adventures at hand, I would argue that, in fact, they represent something really beautiful and really meaningful. They're inspiring. They lead the reader and his characters through a cathartic experience, out of danger and fear, and into an appreciation of the sublime. So back to the green flash. So Oliver, this leader of this excitement, describes it from Fingal's Cave in Scotland. Has anyone ever been to Fingal's Cave? Oh, it's really beautiful. Ian Thompson talks about it.
Yeah, I know Brian Taves made a trip there.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah. It's like Mendelssohn wrote a whole symphony there about the cave. I forgot what it's called that. So anyway, he's there with Miss Campbell, the protagonist of the Green Flash, who's questing for the green light. And they're taking shelter there, and they're seeing this incredible, scary storm, right? And it's a stupendous storm that he describes, just like I described for the fur country. He says, "I'm not afraid. No, since you are here." Very romantic. I no longer fear anything, and in fact, could I have any other feeling than admiration for such a spectacle? Then he says, "Watch," right? And it reminds me of Michel's Treboeuf, the famous line of Michel's Treboeuf, where he says, "Regarde, regarde, de tous tes yeux, regarde, look with all your eyes, see." And he's blind, right? And here, Val is telling us the same thing. Look at that spectacle. Don't be afraid. Everything's going to be great. And there we go. That's it, actually. So enjoy the spectacle. That's my last word. Enjoy. Go see that spectacle and enjoy it. There has to be something deeper, but basically that's it. Thank you.